Hey ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to MH Optical's YouTube page. Today we're talking about frame measurement, not in the way on how to measure them or how we should be measuring them, and why it's important for you to give the surfacing lab accurate frame measurements. Stay tuned. Giving lab accurate frame measurements. Now, this is something that I don't think is really talked about at all, or people may not understand. It actually took me a little bit to understand it myself, or how to demonstrate it for that matter. The first step into understanding what I'm about to talk about is understanding that surface lenses are very different than stock lenses. With stock lenses, your OC is always in the center of the lens. Always in the center of the lens, never decentrated left or right. With surface lenses, it is a custom lens for that job, for that frame, for that patient every time. With a stock lens, it's something we can pull off the shelf, the OC's in the center, and the optician or the person cutting the lens has to be able to decentrate it, and that's where the minimum blank size comes into play. Here are two stock lenses, 75 and 65. Where is the OC on this? It's going to be right in the center of the lens. Same with this, right in the center of the lens. Let's take a frame, for example. Let's take A of 53, B of 34, and ED of 55, DBL of 17. So if we add that up here, we're gonna have a frame PD of 70, and let's give our patient a PD of 60 to make it easy. Okay, so now from here we gotta calculate minimum blank size. Now everybody has their own tips and tricks, however they do it. All I do is I take the total decentration. This one's easy, 70 minus 60 is gonna give us 10, plus the ED, which is 55, is gonna give us 65. Now, I usually give it an extra 5, just to give us that 70 millimeter, just for a little flub room. So now this number right here is great if you're looking for a stock lens, but this number does not matter, or it doesn't even translate to a surface lens. This is only for stock lenses, and I'll show you what I mean in a second right here. So let's take a trace here. Okay, let's put our pupil right here, okay? Let's go ahead and get rid of all this because this has nothing to do with what we're talking about anymore. So here's our trace with our pupil in here. Here's our 65 millimeter lens with our ocular center in the middle. Okay, so what do we need to do now? We have to decentrate. Now we can see that this lens is not going to cut out for this frame, and that's 65 millimeters. So what do we have to do? Move up to the next size or two. This is a 75, and we could see we will just make it with this. Now I didn't do any kind of accurate measurements, and I just put the pupil wherever I wanted to, but now we're good to cut out. So now, let's take the same exact frame. Here's the trace. And this time, we're gonna surface the lens. So now with that, we obviously need a very big lens to make sure it cuts out. That's where the confusion comes in. We can cut this frame out with a 65 millimeter lens. We have to surface it. So to demonstrate that, what I'll do is show you that this frame will cut out with a 65 millimeter. And now what I'll do is I'll grind the ocular center where it needs to be. So now, we're cutting out with a smaller lens. All we did was simply grind the ocular center over using decentration, whether it's prism or the generator actually moves it over. So now, we don't have to use such a big blank moved over to cut it out. We have very minimal waste when it comes to using a surface lens in this situation. Just remember, a surface lens is custom. We can move that OC wherever we need to, and it's dependent on the frame and it's dependent on the patient. On a stock lens, we can't move that. So I'm gonna give you another example here of us using a stock versus surface lens. So let's go ahead and trace our frame. Okay, we'll put our pupil into here. Okay, so now let's take this as our stock lens. We'll put the OC in the center and we'll go ahead and decentrate it over. So now this is where we would need to decentrate this lens to cut it out. Now look at all this waste. That's going to be really hard on our edgers and it's just not necessary. Now what we can do with a surface lens is take a much smaller, this is 10 millimeters smaller, and simply surface the lens and give us a much better cutout. Now we're not going to have nearly as much waste, and it's just a better all look overall, especially when that comes to plus lenses, because with plus lenses, the smaller the lens, the thinner the lens. So keep that in mind when using plus lenses. If you get the smallest blank possible, you're going to have a thinner lens. So now let me give you a quick demo on what can go wrong if you give the wrong frame measurements to your surfacing lab. Let's go ahead and take our frame here and we'll put our PD in there, okay? Now, this is our patient. This is our PD, okay? Now let's say you didn't have time to measure the frame, or let's say you forgot. So you go ahead and order the lens and you order, let's say this is the lens you need and this is the lens you order. Let's call this a 55, 34, and this one can be a 58, 40 something, whatever, it doesn't matter. However, now remember your PD is going to stay the same because you're usually going to give the same PD, but your patient's PD is going to be way over here in this frame. Let's say you give a crazy DBL, or just a random DBL of 20, where this one's only going to be, let's say, 14. Okay, so what's going to happen is our calculation software is going to design the minimum blank possible. Okay, then what it's going to do, so as you can see, a 65 millimeter lens will work, and then it is going to generate the OC all the way over here. Okay, so we're going to generate this lens for you. We're going to polish this lens and we're going to make it this nice lens, and it's going to work for this patient and this frame. If you were to actually put them in this frame, boom, no problem. But the problem is we didn't get the correct information. We got this information, not the information that the customer is going to wear. So what happens when you get this lens? You're going to get this lens, you're going to go to put it in this person's frame, and it's not going to cut out. It's going to be way over there, and it's going to miss. Then what happens is you call the lab and you say, my lens won't cut out, I need a bigger blank. That's not true. You don't need a bigger blank. What you need is the correct frame measurements. Let's say you do give bigger frame measurements than you did before. So now let's say we do achieve a bigger blank. We'll represent this as a bigger blank, okay, which it is, it's a 75 millimeter. However, that PD is still the same in that frame, in a big frame now. Okay, so now we still have this weird OC that's generated all the way over there, and I see this quite a bit. So now you get a bigger blank, you see it, you're gonna say, oh good, this is gonna cut out, but then here's what's gonna happen. The same thing, and you're still missing. Now, most LMS or lab management software systems are going to calculate the minimum blank, and it's going to compensate for decentration using Prism or whatever to move that OC over. It's very, very important that you give accurate frame measurements, or else you're going to have an issue where you're not going to cut. You may be achieving a bigger blank, but you're not going to be able to cut it out because that OC is moving to the appropriate place. Now, if you were to get it for this frame, it would cut out. But since you're taking a surface lens and putting it into a frame that you're not specifying, it will never cut out. So let's do a very quick recap. Why are frame measurements so important to give the surfacing lab? Because that lens is totally custom. If you give the wrong frame measurements or just make up frame measurements, you're never going to be able to cut that lens out. That lens is made specifically for the frame and for the patient. The OC moves with a surfaced lens. That's why if you give bigger frame measurements, you may achieve a bigger lens, but it still won't cut out because that is a totally custom lens for that patient. Once you start to understand that a surface lens is a truly personalized lens, that's when you can start to understand that one needs to give accurate frame measurements and accurate patient info. Otherwise, your lens isn't going to work for that patient. Now, something else to consider is surface lenses might be a little more forgiving on your equipment. Take a 75mm blank, for example. Now, if you have to cut away a lot of excess material that you didn't need to begin with, that's going to be a lot of wear and tear on your edgers. That's just going to wear them down very quickly. If you took the same surface lens, you're only cutting off a little bit of material, leaving you with a lot less wear and tear on your edgers. If there's anything that you take away from this video is, if you're having an issue with cutouts from your surfacing lab, always go back to the basics. Go look at your frame measurements. If you have a tracer in-house, trace it and actually give the frame measurements that come off the tracer to your surfacing lab. That'll help tremendously with cutout and accuracy of the surfaced lens. A surface lens is custom. We move the OC to wherever you need it to be for that lens. So if you give us the wrong frame measurements, we'll never be able to achieve the perfect lens that you need for that frame, for that patient. So next time you're getting ready to go ahead and order your next surface lens, take a little extra time and measure those frame measurements. Make sure you're getting the accurate ED, the accurate A, the accurate DBL, or else you might get a lens that might not work how you need it to work for you. Thanks for checking in, guys, and have a good rest of your day.